Okay, so Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself, and you could briefly introduce yourself and your chapter.
Sure. I'm Nick Sammond. I'm a professor of cinema and media studies at the University of Toronto, up in Canada, to the north of y'all.
Mm.
And my previous work prior to this project has largely been on race, and particularly the racial binary in early American animation. I have a book from 2015 called Birth of an Industry that charts the role of blackface minstrelsy in the formation of American and popular animation. And this work extends from that, in that what I wanted to do in this chapter was both capture the amazing versatility and nuance of George Herriman's work in Krazy Kat, and the way that he deals with race, and compare it to the way that Krazy Kat got taken up by the animation industry and the way that they represented race and minstrelsy, and the differences between them. And to me, that's important because it says a lot about narratives of the racial binary in early American popular culture and vernacular media, but also it says a lot about the problems and complications around passing, in that George Herriman passed as white for most of his life, and that a lot of people who look back on Krazy Kat really want to try to read it through the lens of that act of passing. And I want to try to talk about what's good about that and what's not good about that. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the chapter is trying to do.
Thank you so much. And that's what I really love about the chapter and your work, to really make us think about what you talk about as the symptomatic readings that people often do of Herriman and his work. So for readers who are either new to comics history, or, I mean, Herriman is very well known, but maybe they don't know some of the details about his work, what are two things that newcomers can learn from your chapter, from your research?
Well, I think that what they'll learn that's new is uh, how Krazy Kat came about, the kind of hits and misses that George Herriman did before he finally arrived at Krazy Kat in 1911, and the way that he related himself to being a Black man in a very white industry, and working for the ever charming William Randolph Hearst in particular. And they'll learn about how important, what often gets overlooked in discussions of Krazy Kat in relation to Herriman and his race, is the importance of language in Krazy Kat. The fantastic way that the characters speak to each other and about the world that they live in, is a layer that often gets overlooked with a focus on just the representations on the page. And it's the relationship between image and word that is so important to understanding Herriman, I think.
Is there a scene from your chapter that you can tell us about in a little more detail?
Absolutely. So one of the main themes in Krazy Kat is the complicated love affair between Krazy and Ignatz Mouse. Krazy Kat is coded often as a minstrel, as Black, and Ignatz Mouse as white. And Ignatz Mouse hates Krazy, and Krazy loves that hatred. And so you'll see that he's holding, in the second panel, he's holding a brick. He often will chuck that brick at the back of Krazy's head, and every time he hits her, she feels that it's an affirmation of his deep desire for her. And so in this particular panel, Krazy decides that she's going to turn herself into a blonde. And I'll say something more about the use of the gendered pronouns in a second in regard to this as well.
Okay.
Well, anyway, so she comes into the beauty parlor, she becomes a blonde. Ignatz walks past her completely indifferent, because he's only interested in her when she's Black, and so she runs back into the beauty parlor to change herself back in order to get back to that animosity that she feels is an expression of love. And so there's a lot to unpack in this very simple panel about what Stuart Hall would call the ambivalence of stereotype, the sense of both loving and hating the other in white culture, and about the nature of the desire between these two characters. So what I was going to say very briefly about the gendering of Krazy Kat is that their gender changes constantly throughout the history of this strip. There are times in which they are female and she is the pronoun. There are times when they become male and he is the pronoun. Ignatz is always pretty much Ignatz, but Krazy changes. And so the nature of understanding the desire and the relationship between that with them shifts not only in terms of race, but also in terms of gender and sexuality.
Right.
And so Herriman does this wonderful play in which he really asks us to think about the nature of passing and the nature of labeling in terms of the way we understand relationships between people and creatures in this case, because these are creatures who are people and people who are creatures.